Hello and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I am George and today we will be painting Aeldar Dark Reapers. Wait, no, not these guys. These are the old guys. We will actually be painting these guys, a brand spanking new kit from Games Workshop for Warhammer 40k. The Dark Reapers. They're mean, they're menacing, and they've got big old boomsticks. Here they are, the new Aeldar Dark Reapers, all built and ready for a painting. This was a pretty neat model to build. It was a little different from others that I've done. Though in all fairness, I haven't done very many Aeldar in the past 20 years. This is the first of the bunch. And, I mean, they look a lot like the previous version, or at least the version that I have, the metal version. But they're also more. So they're what they used to be, but plus, if that makes any sense. Like the details are sharper. There's more stuff happening. It's a really, really interesting experience. And I should point out that the Games Workshop team did something pretty interesting here to help with the problem with the anchoring two arms and a weapon that are each separate. So with other model kits, I've had a problem where, I'll put the arm on, and then I'll put the weapon on, and then I'll put the other arm on, and somehow they don't kind of match because the angle of the arm on the model is slightly different from what it's supposed to be. What they've done with this kit is they've provided for the gun holding arm, they provided a secondary anchor point. So there's a device on the power plant, and then there's the shoulder itself that you glue into place. And so what this in effect does is it restricts you to making the arm to be in a very specific position. And that position happens to be the exact one that you need to get the weapon glued onto it in the right place for the other arm. It's really neat. It basically forces you to do the job right. Obviously, it limits your mobility. If you want this Reaper launcher facing up, sorry, you can't. If you want it kind of tucking out of his body, you can't. This is the pose, and that's all you get. But in exchange, it's a pretty neat pose and a pretty neat model. And so the same thing happens to all of these. There's even this variant here where it's clear that he's reloading his Reaper launcher. Nice little detail. I didn't actually realize before very recently. I didn't realize that the kind of that muzzle, that top part of the weapon, that's the magazine. I didn't make that connection before. I don't know why, but this makes it very, very clear that that's what's happening. So with this kit, you don't have a ton of different options, but you do have some. So each of the Dark Reapers has their choice of at least two heads. I chose the heads with the helmets on them, but there is a version without the helmets, and so the Exarch also has a choice of being built as an Exarch or as a Dark Reaper as before. And he's got his choice of a couple of other different heads. He also has the capability of coming with a Reaper launcher, a Torrent launcher. It's basically a double Reaper launcher. The Aeldari missile launcher, which is what I've elected to take here, and the Shuriken cannon. So he has those, although I don't know that there's a decent way of magnetizing it. These models are so tiny. Tiny in relation to other models. Like they're more similar to Tau and to Imperial Guard than they are, for example, to Space Marines and Orcs. So technically you could magnetize if you wanted to, but it would be a lot of work. I think you just decide what role you want your models to play on the battlefield and stick to that. Magnetizing for troops choices, it's a rough deal. More power to you if that's something you want to do. Finally, this model kit comes with this, what I'm assuming is some sort of relic or a statue It looks like a relic of maybe that the Dark Reaper god. I know there was the god of death. It's got a scythe on it. At any rate, I don't know what it does, but it's in there. I'm going to paint it. So now that we're taking a look at the models, it is time to decide on the plan. And the plan for this group of models is going to be fairly straightforward. I did some testing before this because I wanted these to look good, and I think I've got a solid plan. So the plan is to start off with a bright but still warm prime coat. So for priming, I'm going to go with a skeleton bone. It's kind of my usual. So I had a plan. I'm going to interrupt because I'm going to need a new one. I'm just about finished with these Dark Reapers, and they look okay, but they only look okay. I want them to look awesome, and this just isn't going to do it. So I'm going to try again, but first, paint stripper. Sorry guys, I'll do a better job next time. Okay, here's the new plan now. Here are the Dark Reapers. They've been primed with black, and I've given them a zenithal with white just to make the contrasts pretty stark. I want to take advantage of the of my glazing techniques, and I've gotten a little bit better at having my glazes thin enough so that the differences between the white and the black of the zenithal priming show up. But I'll give you a closer look at what these look like. So up here, there's a lot of white you can see. Down here, there's quite a bit of black, and so the idea here is that when our glazes go on, they're going to kind of adopt or let some of that undercoat kind of filter through the paints. In terms of the plan, I have an idea, and it's based on the results of my Malgon Raw model. Basically, what I'm going to do is, again, using very thin glazes, I'm going to give this guy kind of a skeletal look. They're going to be bone white as opposed to black. The idea is that Dark Reapers, well, a lot of them are black. Not all of them. I've seen a couple of non-black Dark Reapers. But I want to make mine, like skeleton boys. Maybe bring heart into the fear, or maybe bring some fear into the heart of their enemies. So I'm going to emphasize that bit of it. I'm going to use bone white as the primary color. I will use black as a secondary or an accent color. So I will include black, but it'll be here and there. As for the weapon, I'm going to go with a custom mix of red that I really, really like. It's kind of a darker red. It should look pretty good. So these are basically going to look a little bit like miniature versions of Malgon Raw. And what I mean by that is this. My Dark Reapers are going to look quite a bit like this, with the exception that the Dark Reapers don't have that big ol' cloak that Malgon Raw has. So imagine Malgon Raw without the black cloak, and you've got my plan. So we'll start with the base coat, and I decided to go with the skeleton bone. Skeleton bone from Army Painter. It's going to be my primary armor color. All the armor bits are going to get this, so basically the entire model is going to be this color, with the exception of the weapon. I will go back afterwards and add some accent colors, which is just going to be the black, but that's going to be in later phases. I just want to make sure I get the base coat for the primary armor to get it looking right. In order to get the glaze as thin as I want, I've used more than my usual number of drops of this stuff that's flow improver, And then I've added a couple of drops of water to make sure it's nice and transparent so that the undercoat, that Zenithal Prime, can show through. As a bonus, the thinness of the paint makes it flow off the brush really nicely. It's really easy to paint. You just want to pay attention and control it a bit. You don't want to get it on anything that you don't want it to get on. The second major color that I'm going to add to the base coat is this stuff, Glistening Blood. It's an effects paint from Army Painter. It's not really designed to be a base coat or whatever, but if you thin it enough, it makes a pretty nice glaze. I think what makes it an effects paint is it's supposed to dry kind of glossy, but I really like the red color, and I've used it with the previous model and it looks really good. So I'm thinning that down, making a glaze, and I'm mixing in just a little bit of matte black to darken up the color just a little bit. Now that the base coat glaze is right where I want it, I'm going to go in and give it a nice wash with a bit of this stuff. It's Agrax Earthshade. It's a kind of a medium brown wash from Citadel Color, and it does a really good job of getting into all those little crevices without really changing the underlying color too much. It still does some of the tinting, and that's okay. I want that. But it's much more subtle than the counterparts from Army Painter. They still have their uses, but for this I want something a bit more delicate, and Agrax Earthshade, that's the way to go. So I apply a thin coat of this stuff all over any part of the model that has got the bone white or the skeleton bone color, which, at least at this phase of the project, is basically all of the model except the gun. Looks like the basing and washing is done, and here is the result. We're most of the way there. All of the model now has some kind of coating, and so we're mostly done. Of course, the hard part is coming next, and that's taking this 90% ready model to 100%. So normally that involves some layer paint, some detailing, and some touching up, obviously getting the base done as well. But I do want to do one thing before I start that process. You'll notice that our Dark Reaper friends here are, well, they're basically one color, which it looked different in my head, I don't know. And so there's just a lot of bone white. This thing needs a bit more attention, but the primary color, this bone white with the Agrax Earthshade wash over it, it's a little darker than I visualized, and so I'm going to need to touch this up. And so I'm touching this up as part of the overall model process. So before detailing, I'm going to do some stuff to bring back some of the color, some of the original bone white color. And to do that, I'm going to use a dry brush. I'm going to use a dry brush with some bone white, and I'm going to go over just the tops. I'm going to give it a fairly generous, but not too generous, dry brushing, so that it'll highlight the armor that's facing upwards, right? Getting sunlight or whatever above light, and bring up the value a little bit. So it looks a little more bone white and less, well, whatever this color is. For the dry brush, I'm going to use Army Painter Skeleton Bone, which is the color of the original base coat. Only the base coat was a glaze, this is a dry brush. I add some of this to my palette, bring out a cheapo brush with short and really stiff bristles. No, not really stiff, but pretty stiff bristles. I have had problems dry brushing in the past, and so when I find a brush that works, I use that until it stops working for whatever reason, and I switch it up. So I can usually find something that'll do the job, but cheapo works pretty well. I hit all the areas of the model that are in bone white originally, and I dry brush on kind of the top surfaces, and I avoid the underside of most of the armor. The idea here is to have the stuff that's on the top, the surfaces that are on the top, have a nice bone white color, bring that back while leaving the stuff that's underneath in some pretty dark shadow. This also kind of helps accentuate all the places where the wash kind of pools, and so it sets up a very nice contrast between the surfaces and the crevices. I don't know if this makes a difference or not, but I do tend to do the dry brush from the top down, wherever possible. It isn't always possible for every surface on the model, but wherever possible, I go top down, so the brush strokes go in one direction. That's to kind of simulate the way light would fall on the model if it were real. I don't know if that it actually makes a difference, but at least it makes me feel better. So there's that. I will repeat this step with Army Painter's Mummy Robes. This is a quite a bit lighter version of off-white, and the intent here is to give it another dry brush, another highlight layer, but this one's going to be very, very sparse. I want to do very light and just on the tops of some of the surfaces, just to kind of set up a difference in gradient between the very lowest lows where the wash is still present, the mids where the bone white has been restored, and of course the mummy robes as my highlights. Because the differences can be kind of subtle, I want to show you what these models look like before and after the dry brush. This is the guy that's dry brushed. You can tell he's brighter, much closer to bone white, but he's still pretty dirty. This is the guy without the dry brush. So I think, generally speaking, the dry brush is a worthwhile step, particularly in this step in the process, as it allows us to really bring the model to where we want it. The wash does a lot of really good work. It helps get those crevices darker, but sometimes it darkens up the base coat too much. So a little bit of dry brushing here really lays the foundation for a good looking piece of armor that you can detail later on. Our Dark Reaper painting project is coming to a close. All that's left is just a bunch of detail work. So we're really close to the end, but we still have a ways to go. It's just a matter of, in terms of surface area, it's relatively small bits, especially compared to putting on the Basecoat Glaze and then adding the wash. So here I'm going to pick out a couple of things. Basically, make the kind of skeletal looking Dark Reapers, make them look a little bit more like troops. And so probably the most important thing that I've done is I've picked out a couple of armor elements that I want to be black. I want to kind of introduce the idea of black without making the model all the way black. So I picked out like the shoulder pads. There's a kind of a breastplate on all of these models, and I made that black, and that'll help contrast there's little gems and sensors and stuff like that I want to pick out in detail as well. There's the arm brace that's connected to the backpack. I made that black as well. There's a couple of little doodads here and there. There's some like armbands. I made that like a dark brown. I picked out all the little jewels. Well, not all of the little jewels, just really just the one. That's the soul gem that the Aeldar all carry. I made that a nice bright blue. I picked out all the sensors and made those red on the kind of the armor veins. Some of these models had leather pouches, so I made those dark brown, and one of them even had a little bit of silver filigree that I made sure to pick out with some overbrushing. That was not as stressful as I thought. Overbrushing is a really powerful technique in that it gives you good results with relatively little effort. You just have to be pretty careful. I also very carefully added glowing red eyes. I know, shocker. Glowing red eyes to all of the Dark Reaper helmets so they look nice and menacing. And on the weapon, to make sure it didn't look really boring, I made sure to highlight, not highlight, but to pick out the kind of the ports where the individual missiles will be shot out of their magazines. I gave that a bone white or skeleton bone color to kind of match up with their armor. To kind of make the gun part of the model, not just kind of its own thing. And I even picked out a couple of those little bubbles on the weapon itself. I made those black, again, just to tie in the gun with the rest of the model. And then, of course, I spent some time picking up all those little details, like all the little patches of paint that I missed, or maybe I didn't get good coverage here and there. I made sure to, touch those up so that they wouldn't end up looking weird and incomplete. As part of this step, I also kind of filled in the gaps in the model's base. So, I did the usual washing and dry brushing, and it added some patches of green color with tufts. Pretty much mandatory. I've got most of the detail put in, and I'm in this weird place where I'm basically done, but I don't really like what I've done, if that makes any sense. And it's not necessarily that I didn't execute well. I think everything that I put on here is fine, for my level of skill, not comparing my results to like real painters. But I think the plan is lacking a bit, and I'm not entirely sure what it is that it's missing, but I feel like it's missing something. And I think that it's just, there's too much skeleton bone. There's too much of one color, not enough of another. I may be completely off the mark here, because I do have a decent amount of black on the armor, but I just don't know. I don't know. And the more I look at it, the less that cowl makes sense on the Exarch. So here's what I think I'm going to need to do. I think I'm going to need to introduce some additional black, and I think I'm going to do this right on the tabard. Since the tabard is like something that you wear, it isn't like the armor necessarily, kind of called back to the cloak. I'm also thinking the cowl, I need to just bite the bullet and make that black. The bone armor cowl just doesn't make sense to me. The more that I look at it, the less I like it. So here's an example of sometimes the plan doesn't work out the way you thought the way you thought it was going to. So you got to adapt, improvise, and hope that you do a better job. So I'm gonna add some black to the tabards. I'm gonna blacken up that cowl, and I'm gonna do that to every one of these, and hopefully that introduces enough variety so it's less monolithically skeleton bone. Alright, so here are the finished Aeldar Reapers, and it was fairly straightforward. Using the glazes and washes does a pretty decent job of getting you tabletop ready models. About the biggest things you have to worry about really are just getting your mixes correct, and picking your color scheme, and really just going at it. Then kind of deciding what kinds of detail you're going to pick out. It's not an easy call by any means, but those are the most kind of intensive things you have to worry about when you're taking this approach to creating Dark Reapers. You need to keep in mind that this approach really gets you quick and decent looking models. They're not going to get you really, really good looking models. There's probably a really good way of doing that, but that is kind of beyond my skill level, and it's kind of beyond my ability to kind of help you get there. I want to get you from 0 to 45. From 45 to 60, that's kind of on you, and there's plenty of other channels that'll help you, do a really good job with blending and layering and all kinds of really nice things. This approach, it takes your current level of skill, or my current level of skill, and it gets you most of the way. You can fill these without feeling all that embarrassed. There's going to be plenty of armies that are going to be better looking than yours, but there's going to be a bunch that are not as good looking as yours, so you're going to be somewhere smack in the middle, and that's a decent place to be. You can absolutely invest more time and effort into making your models pop, into making your models be really, really good, and that's fantastic. I totally encourage those of you who want to take that approach. But if you want something quick, easy, and good enough, well, here is good enough. There's a couple of things about these models that I really liked. And so the helmet, for example, the faceplate, there is this really nice contrast between the kind of the faceplate and the kind of the rictus grin that they all have, that little skeletonized mouth area. That was, I didn't have to do much of anything. That kind of was just a byproduct of the way I painted them. I didn't have to go in there with a tiny little brush and pick out that little smile, or whatever you want to call that, or that grimace, whatever it is. It is just a product of the glazing, and then the washing, and then the drybrushing on top of that. It just kind of was a byproduct, and it's an intentional one, but it wasn't something that you had to spend effort in putting in and maybe messing up. So I really liked that. I do like the way the bone armor looks on these models. It's a little more bright than I expected, actually. I was kind of hoping for something a little more yellow, a little more skeletal. This is a little less, it's a little brighter. And that's to be expected. I used kind of more aggressive highlights than I anticipated, but that's okay. It looks pretty decent. I'm a little concerned about the blacks. I mean, I intentionally made them kind of dull and transparent so that the bone armor behind them can come out. But a side effect of that is that they don't look particularly dark. They don't look very rich. And I don't know. A lot of the box art that I've seen, or a lot of the models that I've seen, they look really black and they really look nice. And they use other techniques, more labor-intensive techniques, to make them look good. And so, there's a price to be paid for my approach, and that is one of them. I kind of want to spend more time doing a better job with my black armor. But that's, time and patience that'll come. Another thing I know that I have to work on, and maybe some of you guys can help me, I don't know, is kind of the selection, the color palette that I use. I use very simple color palette because I don't have a good grasp on color theory. I don't know how to get a bunch of different colors on the same model to look good as opposed to chaotic or cartoony. And so, I have kind of a dull palette across all of my models, and it's becoming very apparent, and it's not something I can kind of it's not something I can ignore too much longer. It's an itch that I can't ignore, and so I know I have to get better at that. I'm not quite sure how to go about doing it in a time-efficient manner, but it is something that I got to work on. At any rate, this was a pretty neat build. It was a nice painting project to chase after. I really enjoyed my time with these models, and it's particularly nice for me since I am an old-school Eldar player, so I was able to kind of compare my models against what they used to look like. As a matter of fact, I went out into my little box of memories, and I pulled out my original Dark Reapers. These are the metal guys from the very early 2000s, very late 1990s. I originally stopped collecting Warhammer 40k in around the year 2000, and so these are the Dark Reapers I had back then. They're pretty neat. They're about the same size. And you can kind of see the aesthetic similarities, but there's a huge jump in quality difference. And I mean the model's not necessarily the paint job, although that too I think is probably a little better now, although not as much as I would hope. But if I had to choose between these two, I would certainly pick these new guys. They look pretty cool. I know there was a new iteration of Dark Reapers kind of in between these two, but I'd never picked those up. I'm not sure what they look like. But it's nice to see how far we've come in the hobby and as a painter. Thanks for watching me get my Dark Reapers into shape and add it to my collection. I hope you picked something up, and if you did, let me know in the comments. I appreciate your watching. Have a wonderful afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace.